All right, Revelation tonight, Revelation chapter number 6. And recall that we left off with the fifth seal. What happened in the fifth seal? Anybody remember? You know there'd be a test, did you? Remember, the fifth seal reveals the saints that have been martyred during the first half of the tribulation period. And they cry out, "How long, O Lord, wilt thou not avenge us?" They're given white robes and they're told to rest a little while until their brothers would join them. Of course, that's the second half of the tribulation period, known as the Great Tribulation period. And those we'll see over in chapter 7. All right, now what we're doing is basically giving you chapter 6 and 7, kind of give you an overview of that whole period. And then there'll be specific details coming in the next seals and individual details about each chapter and about each event that takes place. So right now this is more general, and then we'll get into specifics later. So look at verse number 12, where we left off. "And I beheld when he had opened the" what seal? 6. All right, underline that, the 6th seal. All right, anybody remember what 6 means or symbolizes in numerology? Right, 6 is the number of man. Remember, it talks about when the Antichrist develops his seal, it's going to be 666. Remember that? Okay, but this refers to the number of man. Now look what happens. We'll see something drastic happen when that seal's opened. Okay? And what happens? Right. An earthquake with a capital Q. Okay? I mean an earthquake, because look what happens. It says, there was a great earthquake. Now notice that adjective. When you see earthquake, that's one thing. You know, California and other places, even here we have earthquakes. But when you see the idea of a great earthquake, you're talking 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 on the Richter scale, a major earthquake. And look what happens as a result. "And lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled up together, and every mountain and island removed out of their place." Wow. Now think about that. Every mountain and every island is going to do what? Move. What's that mean? They're going to be changed. It may be that, you know how the continents are drifted apart now. It may be when God shakes it that comes back together. We don't know, but I do know this, that's pretty drastic. If an island or a mountain is in one spot and it's moved to another spot, that tells you there's a major earthquake going to happen. All right? So look at the rest of it. "And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island removed out of their place." Now think about this. If the sun becomes black and the moon becomes red, what's going to happen to your vision? It's going to be hard to see. Exactly right. All right? And then look what happens, the result. "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman," that's a slave, "and every free man." Now, so who does that include? That's pretty much everybody, isn't it? All right? "And the free man hid themselves" where? In the caves. Right, in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. Okay? So wherever there was an overhang with a rock and a hole, they'd be in those holes, in those caves, in those hidey places, we call them. All right? Now, how many of y'all ever been in a cave? Okay? Now, let me ask you this, just common sense. If the earth is shaking and the mountains are moving, do you want to get in a hole in the ground? No, I don't think so. But sure enough, they're hiding. They have places that they're going to hide. Now, remember, I don't know if y'all know this, but in the military, they've got this great big underground complex out in Colorado that's where the government's supposed to go and hide, okay, in the mountains. And it's going to be something like that I picture here. It's going to be something like that. But notice what they cry. Verse 16, and said to the mountains and rocks, what? Fall on us and hide us. Now, I want you to see the rest of this, because this tells you they know what's going on. Look at the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say here. He says, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from what? From the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Now, these are the lost people saying this. But notice who they're giving credit for this great earthquake, for this darkening of the sun, the reddening of the moon, the moving of the islands and the mountains. Who are they giving credit to? See? God. The one that sits on the throne is God. And the Lamb, who is that? Christ. Now think about this. Christ is the one that's opening this sealed book. Okay? Remember, he was pictured there over in chapter 5 as the Lamb that takes the book, the sealed book, out of the hand of God, the one that sitteth on the throne. All right? Look at verse number 6, chapter 5. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne, and of the four beasts, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, capital L, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent forth into all the earth. And he came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne. So that's 2 distinct persons. That's God the Father and God the Son. The Lamb is God the Son. He takes the book out of the hand of him that's sitting on the throne, the Father. And then in these chapters, we've seen the opening of the seals. And this, of course, is the 6th seal. Now look at this. Look what they say. Hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne. I want you to think about that. How are you going to hide from God? Okay. Right? Write you a reference here, Psalm 139. Remember that? Psalm 139? Let me read it to you real quick like. It says, whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. What's that saying? That's exactly right. And that goes back to the omnis of God. What would you call that? If you go everywhere and God's there, what's it? Right. Omni present. Omnipresent. Okay? God's everywhere. So here these guys are trying to find a place of safety, trying to find a place of refuge, and there are none. Like I said earlier, if you're having earthquakes and mountains moving, do you think it'd be a safe place to hide in a hole? But like I said, it's probably the fact that these great leaders and mighty men have these little hidey holes built into the mountains, and they think they shall escape the wrath of God. Got news for them. They're not going to escape the wrath of God. And notice it says, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Now, who's opening the seals? The Lamb. Okay? The Lamb is opening the seals and declaring his wrath. Remember, the Lamb, it's hard to picture a lamb as wrathful, isn't it? But as the Lion of Judah, what is he? As the Lion of Judah, he will destroy the wicked ones. But now think of this. It says, fall on us, hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. Okay? Jesus is that Lamb. That Lamb will demonstrate his wrath against who? The inhabitants of the earth. Those who are persecuting his people. Those who have slain the tribulation saints. Both tribulation and great tribulation, the Lamb will be wrathful towards them. He's going to finally get his vengeance. Remember that verse over there in that we just read? Look at verse number 11, chapter 6. And it says, and white robes were given unto every one of them, and was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were, should be fulfilled. So right before this great earthquake is the joining of that group of people to the other group of people that are in heaven, and they will be the martyrs killed during that time. Now think about that. If you're waiting to be saved, what are you waiting for? Are you postponing your salvation? Well, I'm going to sow my wild oats. I'm going to be free until I can get older and then settle down. What's wrong with that thinking? You're not guaranteed tomorrow for one thing. But look what you're waiting for. What's going to happen during the tribulation period to those who would name the name of Christ? They're going to die. They're going to be martyred for their testimony and for refusing what? That mark on their forehead or on their hand. And we've yet to cover that mark, but that's why they're going to die, for their testimony and for standing on the word of God. And the Antichrist and all of his gang are going to be hunting them down like dogs, killing them, selling them into slavery, tormenting them, torturing them, just like they have through all the centuries before. If you stop and think about the Roman emperors, the 10 Roman emperors, for 10 whole emperors, they did nothing but persecute Christians. Look at Fox's Book of Martyrs and study that and see what our ancestors, the Baptists, went through. You think about Nero. He was the one that started it by burning Rome and then blaming the Christians. So they started persecuting Christians. They put them in lions' dens. They fed them to the lions. They sewed them up in sheepskins and fed them to the lions. They had them fight. They had a family guy that was a farmer fight gladiators to defend his family. All right, and the gladiators would walk over there and kill their children, kill their wives, kill their servants, and kill them too. All right in front of their eyes. And then that one emperor, remember, he had taken crucifixes all up and down the road. They had crucifixes, and they'd fill them up. And they'd hang people up on those crosses, pour tar all over them, and light them. You can imagine that. And then all the other various and sundry ways that they killed, tormented, tortured, and just tried to destroy the Christians. Got news for them. Didn't work. Didn't take. They're still Christians today. And there will always be a Christian witness on this earth until the Lord says that's it. That final battle of Gog and Magog, when he destroys the final sinner, and then judgment comes and he cast them into the lake of fire. Now here they are calling for the rocks and the mountains to fall on them. Think about this earthquake. You'll find that earthquakes are frequent. Remember, Jesus said over in Matthew 24, there shall be earthquakes in divers places. What's that mean? Right. Everywhere there's going to be earthquakes. As a matter of fact, you think about it, the earthquakes, if you look at the history and of recordings of earthquakes, you'll find that more and more frequently earthquakes are happening. They're building for this moment when this great earthquake takes place. So here in the sixth seal, we find men trying to hide from the face of God. That's foolish. They said, hide us from the wrath of the Lamb. That's foolish. Jesus is God. God is Jesus. The one and the same, yet separate personalities of the Trinity. Now think of this. If you're going to hide in a hole and say, hey, save us from him, what does that tell you about your logic? It's not very smart, is it? You're saying, hide us, rocks. Hide us, mountains, from the one that sits on the throne. Now that means he's visible to them. That means they can see him. That means they know who it is that's doing this to them. They know that they're facing God, the Father, and they know they're facing the Lamb, God the Son, and God the Spirit's right there too. They know they're facing them. And what do they cry out? Hide us. Won't do no good, as they say. You cannot hide from God. You cannot escape God's attention. Neither will the Antichrist, the false prophet, or any of those armies that follow after him. So this sixth seal is a very heavy seal, right? And that's why it's the number 6, because it deals with all of these lost people that God is going to deal with for their persecution of his saints during the tribulation period. Now you think about the wrath of Christ and how that he will execute his vengeance upon these that have done these hideous things to his people. You think about that. Let's go over to Revelation 19. Revelation 19. Here we'll see, before the battle, we'll see a marriage and a marriage supper. And then we see the beast and the false prophet taken and the army slaughtered. We'll skip down to verse number, let's go to verse 16. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God. What's he saying? Hey, come eat. Gonna be a big supper. All right? And notice it says, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. So what's that tell you? Every man. Verse 19, and I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. That's the Lord Jesus Christ and the army that comes with him from heaven, and us too, we're riding right there beside him on our white horses. Verse 20, and the beast was what? What's that mean? When you have a fight, back in the day, when you had a fight and you captured the leader, what did that mean? Battle's over, right? That's not what that means here. Keep reading. And the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had what? Received the mark of the beast. Again, the mark of the beast. And them that worshipped his image. These both were cast, how? Into where? That burneth with brimstone. And again, to remind you, brimstone is like sulfur, and you pour sulfur on a fire, you're going to get a hot fire. All right? It amplifies the heat by 10 times. And then verse 21 was where we were going here. Look at what it says. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceedeth out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. So what happened to the rest of the army? The written word of Christ, the spoken word of Christ in this case, when he's riding that horse, that sword that proceedeth out of his mouth is his spoken word. Okay? It's not some gross sword sticking out of his mouth like some robot or something. No. It is his spoken word. Now look at this. He's going to smite this army with the mere word. Well, think about this. How did he create the heavens and the earth and all therein? By speaking. How can he create something from nothing? He's God. How does he speak it into his existence? He says, be this way, and it was. Genesis chapter 1. Now the scientists are going to argue with you and say, oh, all this came together. All this accidentally came together. There's one big bang somewhere, way off somewhere, and everything just happened to come together and form a sludge pool on this earth. And then lightning happened to strike that sludge pool, create a one-celled amoeba that eventually crawled out on the land and thus turned into some kind of critter, an ape, I believe they say. And then that evolved into a man, and here we are. That's how we got here. How foolish. That's the wisdom of men. God tells us right there in Genesis how he did it. He formed man out of the dirt, the dust of this earth, and he breathed the breath of life into him, and then he took a rib from Adam and made Eve. Well, that's not that hard to believe. I have a harder time believing all this other stuff happened by chance. Can you imagine the odds? I think they said the odds are like 60 trillion to 1 that could happen. And that's what they're trusting in. Okay? They're trusting in that extreme odd that this happened like this, and it's theory. That's the evolution theory, which is a theory is something that's yet unproved. They can't prove it. So technically, it's still a hypothesis. All right, now look at this. It says, and these were he that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. What's that mean? They ate, and they ate good. Now, Zechariah tells us that the blood will run up to the horse's bridle. Now, that's 6 foot, or thereabouts. Remember, the battle takes place when Christ sets foot on the earth. Mount of Olives splits in two. When that mountain splits in two, there'll be a valley formed, and that's the Valley of Armageddon or Megiddo, whichever one you want to call it. That's that valley that's formed from that split, and that is where the blood is going to run up to the horse's bridle. And I want you to see that description of Christ there in chapter 19. Again, I want you to see that. Look as he comes riding that white horse. Okay? I want you to see this. I'm going to start reading in verse 11. And I saw heaven open, behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. And he was clothed, notice this, with a vesture, now look at that, dipped in blood. Now think about this. You're riding a horse, right? And you go into battle, and the blood is flowing. It's flowing up to the horse's bridle. What's going to happen to your legs and the hem of your garment? They're going to be covered in blood, dipped in blood. All right? The blood of his enemies. And that's kind of gross to think about, but look at this picture. What if you were one of those 100 or 144,000 converts, not the converts, but the believers of the 144,000? What if you're one of them and you've been slaughtered like that? They've hunted you down like a dog, and they've tormented you, they've tortured you, they've killed you. You're wanting vengeance, aren't you? Remember? Look what they were crying out there in chapter 6. Go back there. Verse 10. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our what? Blood on them that dwell on the earth. You see, the whole earth has gone whole hog to the Antichrist. There will be some that don't join up with him. There are some that cooperate with him. And there are the 10 kingdoms that actually follow him. He sets up the world economy, the world religious system, and everybody goes along with it. Except the few. Why? Because men are stubborn, aren't they? Some of them are going to rebel. Say, no, I ain't going in with that mess. I don't believe that. I'm going to fight against you. And they do. They fight against him. As a matter of fact, they destroy his headquarters. At the first 3.5 years, they have a fight, and his headquarters is destroyed. So what does he do? He moves into the new temple, puts his throne in that temple, in the Holy of Holies, right there where that piece of furniture is supposed to be. He takes his throne, moves that piece out, takes his throne, sets it up, and says, I'm God. You got to worship me. That's the Antichrist, the beast. And the false prophet is telling everybody, yeah, that's him. Go ahead, worship him. So here it is now, the blood's going to flow. And here it is, these men are hiding from this great earthquake. They've gone into hiding. And they think they can skip over the rich men, the great men, the small men, the slaves, and all them. They think that they can escape the wrath of the Lamb and the wrath of God. Can't be done. Because at the end, in the Battle of Armageddon, you find that wrath being poured out, and every single one in that army that faces against Christ is slain. Every single one of them. The leaders are thrown into the lake of fire, and they're burning. Okay? All right, and then you'll find the next setting there after the Battle of Armageddon, chapter 20. You'll see the millennial age for the 1,000 years. At the end of that millennial age, you'll then see the devil loosed for a season, and then he gathers the rest of mankind, and they go whole hog after him, and they surround us there at Jerusalem where we are encamped about the city. They surround us, and then God sends fire from heaven and cooks every one of them, gives them an early taste of what's going to happen to them. They go into hell, and as quick as they hit the doors are going to open. They're going to say, ooh, we get out. Nope, they're going to be taken directly to the great white throne. They're going to be pronounced guilty. They're going to be shown their sins. They're going to be condemned for their sins. They're going to be judged for their sins, and they're going to be punished for their sins in the lake of fire, where the devil, the beast, and the false prophet are. That's where they're going. Okay? So God's going to round up all that sin and place it in one spot called the lake of fire. Now, is the devil going to be able to escape that place? Is the false prophet? Is the beast? When they get put in there, they ain't coming out. And I don't doubt that God's got some kind of chain that's got them chained in their little cubbyhole. And all throughout the rest of eternity, they're going to be tormented for every sin that they've ever committed. And think of this, that devil, that Antichrist, and that false prophet get to see their army slaughtered instantly. They don't have a chance. Now remember, in a battle that's going to happen in the future, what kind of weapons are they going to have? Everything that we have right now, and then some. All right, you know we got guns that can shoot around a corner? Yeah, they got mirrors on them, and they have a barrel that will shoot this way. What happens is it's got a longer trigger, and then it actually hits it on the part that's going this way or that way or up and down. So they can stick that barrel around the corner and then sight it in, and boom, they can shoot you from behind the corner. That's pretty handy, isn't it? Then you got lasers, and you got nuclear weapons and devices. You've got biological warfare. You've got gas, chemical warfare. All those things, what do you think that the Antichrist is going to have lined up? But now remember, if we've already been raptured to heaven, and we come riding back with our Lord, who can kill us? Nobody. If they aim every single nuclear weapon device on us, and they pulled the trigger and it went boom, what would happen after that? Nothing. They'd be wiped out. But nothing could happen to us because we have been changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, and we shall be like him. So here it is now. They know who it is that's doing this punishment. This wrath is being poured out upon the men of this time. After the great tribulation period comes that battle of Armageddon. They know God's coming to take care of business. He's promised his saints he's going to avenge their blood, and he does. Remember in the Old Testament, they had that system set up called the cities of refuge. You might remember that? There were 7 cities scattered all the way through Israel called cities of refuge. If you accidentally killed somebody, or let's say that your bull or some animal of yours killed somebody, guess who they sent after you? They called him the Avenger. And this ain't no movie, this is real. They called him the Avenger of the family. That Avenger, just as quick as he heard that you were slain by this person, his duty was to get to you as quick as he could and do business against you. He was the Avenger. But now if you got to that city of refuge, you get to hide there. And now this is if you're not guilty of murder. This is accidental death. Now if you're guilty of murder, you don't get no refuge. But in an accidental death, you could go run to that city, hide in that city, and be safe there as long as that high priest is alive. And then when he dies, then you can leave and be safe. But you have to stay there for the rest of your life or until that high priest dies, then you can leave. So you're basically incarcerated in one city, okay, for the rest of your life. The Avenger cannot get you there. They're called cities of refuge. But that's only for accidental death, not for those that actually commit murder, deliberate murder. They would get stoned immediately anyway. All right? So once you take that idea of the Avenger and multiply it times 10 or infinity, which is God, think of the power of God to avenge your blood or the blood of these martyrs against this Antichrist and his kingdom. The God even lines up the buzzards and say, here you go, buzzards. Here's you a good meal. Here's you some supper. Here's you a great supper. You can eat till your heart's content. You can eat till you get sick of eating. Remember what they said when they got that manna? Oh, we loathe this manna. We're tired of this manna. Would that we had some meat. What'd God do? Gave them quail till they choked on it, didn't he? Well, this is the same thing. God's going to pour out his wrath on these men, and these buzzards are going to eat till they get sick of eating. And there'll still be plenty left over. But what happens to this earth? The Lord sets up his kingdom, and it's like a paradise for 1,000 years. Remember that Ezekiel tells us that the lion shall lay down with the lamb, and the wolf with the child, the scorpion and adder shall not bite, all that kind of stuff. It's just going to be a perfect garden of paradise for 1,000 years, and men will be being born on this planet. And then here comes the devil, loosed for a season, and he gets the rest of mankind who are not saved to follow after him in a battle, one more battle. The devil just don't learn, does he? He lost this battle of Armageddon. He thinks he can beat. He's had 1,000 years to strategize what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. But you know what? We've read the rest of the story. He can't win. He couldn't win. No matter how hard he tries, he can't win. Why? He's not God. He thinks he is. He wants to be. And that's been his whole drive and motivation this whole time. He wants to kill God. And that's why Jesus said he was a murderer from the beginning. That was his idea, to overthrow God, have a coup, kill God, and then he would be God. Sorry, you can never be God because you're a created being. Created beings cannot be God. Our God is the infinite, eternal, immortal, and they will not be able to kill him, else he wouldn't be God. So think about that. You can't kill God. Christ allowed himself to be slain one time. Actually, he didn't even get slain by the men, did he? What did he do? He gave up and dismissed his spirit. That means they didn't kill him. He was already dead when they came around and poked him with that spear, remember? He was already dead. And we'll be thinking about that in this season of Easter. We'll think about the resurrection and his death, burial, and resurrection. And his death on that cross, that soldier, when he walked up to him, said, oh, he's dead already. Well, let's just make sure, and sticks that spear up in his side, and it pierces his heart sac, and out flowed water and blood, which means that heart sac was pierced with that sword, with that spear. All right? They knew he was dead already. Them Roman soldiers were expert in death. He had dismissed his spirit. It was already dead. Then his disciples came, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus came, took him down, rolled him up in grave cloth, and then took him to that borrowed tomb, Nicodemus's tomb, or Joseph's tomb, and then buried him there. And the women said, hey, you ain't doing it right. We'll be back. We're going to fix it. It's Sabbath now. We can't do anything, but we'll be back and we'll do it right. So they come early in the morning, and what do they find? The stone was rolled away. An angel sitting there and said, hey, he ain't here. That's what we're thinking of now. And think about this. They tormented Christ as well. And they torment, and they torment, and they torment. But one day, God's going to say, that's enough. It's time to finish it up. And he will finish things up. So this earthquake is but a prelude to the things that are going to happen to the Antichrist, the false prophet, and all those kings that follow after them, and all of mankind that rejects God, and all of mankind that rejects his Son and his salvation will wind up, we'll see that in chapter 20, will wind up in that lake of fire that burneth with brimstone. So all of mankind that serves the Antichrist, the false prophet, the devil, all of them will be there, rounded up into that lake of fire, never to be loosed again. All right, so that's chapter number 6 and the 6th seal. All right, and then you're going to see the gears change a little bit. In chapter 7, we're going to see a different scenario that's happening during the tribulation period. There's going to be, go ahead and read ahead, and you'll see the sealing of the 144,000 in their foreheads with the mark of God. And of course, that's why the Antichrist mocks that and comes up with his own mark, where you'll be marked in your forehead or your hand. Okay? Now, why does he say forehead or hand? Think about that. I've told you before. Why does he say forehand or head? Most people don't have no hand if it's chopped off, right? What are you going to do? If you're going to ain't got no hand, where are you going to have to be marked? In your head. Okay? You imagine going down to Piggly Wiggly or the IGA and said, okay, I want to buy this, and you have to take your head and go. Think about that. Most of them just run their hand, and that little chip in there is going to say, oh, there you go. You got that mark? Yeah. Put it on this scanner. Yeah, it works. There's my money. Yeah. Go ahead and take some of it. Yeah. It's not that hard to think about that. What do they do for dogs right now? I'm just getting sidetracked here. Don't they put little chips in your dogs right now? What do those chips tell you? That tells you the owner, their address, their phone number, and any type of medical health that they put on that chip. It's there, and all they have to do is wave a wand over it, and it reads that chip. And it says, oh, this dog don't belong to you. It belongs to so-and-so at this address. And they call so-and-so and say, hey, somebody got your dog here. And then guess what? That's a felony. They put you in jail for a felony stealing a dog. All right? But these are the kind of things that we're looking at, and there's a lot that's going on here. But look at this sixth seal in this sense. Men are going to try to hide from the justice and the wrath of God. They're not going to be able to. And this earth is going to start seeing some drastic reform. Some drastic things are going to happen to it. And it will stay like that throughout the tribulation period until the Lord heals it during that time called the millennial, or the 1,000 years of peace. It will be a perfect place then. There will be kingdoms still, yes. But what are those people going to be doing during that time of the 1,000-year reign? They're going to be plotting and conspiring to overthrow Christ. Look at Psalm number 2. There will be plotting against Christ, the perfect governor, the perfect president, the perfect King of kings and Lord of lords. They'll be trying to overthrow him by conspiracy, by complaint, and they're going to reject him. But guess what? He's already ready for it. He knows what's going to happen. And we know what's going to happen because the rest of the story has been written for us to know what's going to happen. We have confidence in knowing what's going to happen because the Word of God says so. That's it. We trust it, we believe it, and we trust that what God says he will do, he's going to do. He'll get her done. All right, we'll stop there. We'll take up, Lord willing,